from Wikipedia, the free encyclopedia at en.wikipedia.org. This recording is of the September 4th, 2020 version of The Page. The Golden Dragon Massacre was a gang-related shooting attack that took place on September 4th, 1977, inside the Golden Dragon restaurant at 822 Washington Street in Chinatown, San Francisco, California. The 5 perpetrators, members of the Joe Boys, a Chinese youth gang, were attempting to kill leaders of the Hua Qing, a rival Chinatown gang. The attack left 5 people dead and 11 others injured, none of whom were gang members. 7 perpetrators were later convicted and sentenced in connection with the murders. The massacre led to the establishment of the San Francisco Police Department's Asian Gang Task Force, credited with ending gang-related violence in Chinatown by 1983. The restaurant itself closed in 2006. Table of Contents. 1. Shooting. 1.1. Motivation. 1.2. Planning. 1.3. At the Golden Dragon. 1.4. Cleaning up. 2. Victims. 3. Aftermath. 3.1. Investigation. 3.2. Arrests. 3.3. Trials. 3.4. Release and parole. 3.5. Long-term results. Section 4. See also. Section 5. References. And Section 6. External links. Section 1. Shooting. Subsection 1. Motivation. The incident was motivated by a long-standing feud between 2 rival Chinatown gangs, the Joe Boys, Chung Ching Yi, and Hua Qing, traced back to 1969 when the first victim was killed. The 2 gangs controlled different parts of San Francisco, with the Hua Qing in Chinatown and the Joe Boys in the Richmond and Sunset districts, and had been rivals since the Joe Boys splintered off from the Hua Qing in the late 1960s. The shooting at the Golden Dragon was an attempted assassination of Hua Qing leaders and was a direct retaliation for the shootout with the Hua Qing in Chinatown's Pingying Peace Garden housing project on July 4th, 1977, which was sparked by a dispute over fireworks sales. That shootout resulted in the death of 16-year-old Felix Huey, sometimes romanized as Huey, and the wounding of Melvin Yu, both members of the Joe Boys. Huey's murder, in turn, was seen as a reprisal for the earlier death of King Chen Louis, a 20-year-old member of the Hua Qing who had been shot a dozen times on May 31st while attempting to escape in his car. Louis's death was later memorialized in a poem by Michael McClure, who came upon the victim shortly after the shooting. Including those victims in the Golden Dragon, 44 people had been murdered during the war between the Joe Boys and Hua Qing by 1977. Inspector McKenna of San Francisco Police counted 55 deaths between 1969 and 1977. Subsection 2. Planning. The raid was planned in a Dali City apartment. Preparations began in early 1977 when Joe Boys members began acquiring the weapons that would be used in the massacre. During the summer of 1977, Tom Yu, a leader of the Joe Boys, convinced a longtime friend who owned a home in Pacifica to store the weapons, wrapped in cloth, in the front closet of that home. On August 29, 1977, Yu met Carlos Yan, a member of another gang. Yu asked Yan to keep a track of Hua Qing and the allied Hop Sing Tong gang members over the coming Labor Day weekend, showing special interest in where they gathered late at night. The conspirators decided to target the Golden Dragon because it was a favorite hangout of both the Hua Qing and the Hop Sing Tong. The planned raid would also financially damage Jack Lee, a Hop Sing elder who co-owned the restaurant. Yu gave Yan the phone number of the Pacifica home and asked him to call on the following Saturday, September 3rd. That Friday night, September 2nd, members of the Joe Boys gathered in Pacifica, retrieved the weapons, and put them on display. Yu received a phone call at 1 a.m. on Saturday morning, and after a brief private conversation, ordered the weapons to be put back into the closet. By this time, the group plotting the shooting consisted of Tom Yu, his brothers, Chester and Dana, Melvin Yu, no relation, Peter Ning, Peter Cheung, Chris Tam, Cam Lee, and Dong Wang. Later that evening, the gang returned to the Pacifica. Around 9:30 p.m., two members of the Joe Boys, Peter Cheung and Dan Yu, were asked to steal a four-door car, which would facilitate entry and exit for a quick getaway. They returned shortly afterward with a blue Dodge Dart and parked it in the home's driveway. The gang members retrieved the guns from the closet after the homeowners returned and went to sleep. At 2 a.m. Pacific Standard Time on Sunday, September 4th, 1977, Tom Yu received a phone call from Carlos Yan that members of the rival Huaqing gang, including Michael Hot Dog Louie, one of its leaders, were present at the Golden Dragon restaurant in San Francisco's Chinatown. Chester Yu drove a group of four Joe Boys, himself, Curtis Tam, Melvin Yu, and Peter Ning, to the Golden Dragon using the stolen Dodge. 40 minutes later, at 2:40 a.m., Chester Yu parked the stolen car near the Golden Dragon and stayed in the driver's seat while the others went to the restaurant. Armed with a .45 caliber Commando Mark III rifle, a modern clone of the Thompson machine gun, two 12-gauge pump-action shotguns, and a .38 caliber revolver, the other three donned nylon stocking masks and entered the restaurant with the second entrance at 818 Washington, looking for members of the Huaqing. During the trial of Curtis Tam, Chester Yu testified that Tam was wielding a shortened shotgun, Ning had a long-barreled shotgun and a handgun, and Melvin Yu was using the rifle. A crowd estimated between 50 to more than 100 people, many of whom were tourists, were present at the restaurant at the time of the shooting. Subsection 3. At the Golden Dragon. According to Chester Yu, Ning had instructed Tam to fire a shot in the ceiling first, so that, quote, when the people panic and get down on the floor, we will decide who to shoot, unquote. Instead, without warning, the three randomly opened fire on the patrons inside the crowded restaurant, killing 5 people, including 2 tourists, and wounding 11 others, none of whom were gang members. In Tam's confession, he stated he had been forced to join the shooting and deliberately did not target any patrons. After he, quote, heard Melvin start shooting, then Peter, I fired my first shot at the sofa. The second I aimed where nobody was, unquote. Testimony at Melvin Yu's trial showed that he was the first to open fire, using the rifle. Melvin Yu walked directly up to a man at a table and shot him 9 times, continuing to shoot after the victim had fallen to the floor. Melvin Yu then redirected his automatic rifle and shot randomly into the crowd, accompanied by 2 shotgun blasts from the other gunman. The first victim, later identified as Paul Wada, a visiting law student, may have been misidentified as a gang sympathizer. Initial news report incorrectly identified some shooting victims as, quote, highly placed, unquote, gang members. The intended targets, the leadership of the Huaqing and Hop Sing, were sitting at a table at the back of the restaurant. They were not injured in the shooting. Up to 10 members of the Huaqing, including their leader, Michael Louie, ducked under tables during the gunfire. They had been alerted by a friend who spotted the 3 gunmen running towards the restaurant from the front-facing window and shouted, quote, man with a gun, unquote, in Cantonese and English. Triad member Raymond Kwok Chow, then 17 years old and a member of the allied Hop Sing Tong, who would later achieve considerable notoriety, was among those who survived the attack. The shooting lasted less than 60 seconds. Police later called it the worst mass murder in San Francisco history. Comedians Philip Proctor and Peter Bergman of the Firesign Theater were eating at the Golden Dragon during the shooting, after performing a Proctor and Bergman show at the Great American Music Hall. When Bergman, an Army veteran, realized the perpetrators had emptied their weapons, he rose from cover in time to see their faces as they exited. He later testified in their conviction. 2 off-duty armed police officers were also dining at the Golden Dragon during the attack. James Bonanno, a restaurant patrolman, dove for cover when the gunman entered. He later testified that he pulled his revolver and radioed for help while hiding. Once the shooting stopped, after 30 to 45 seconds, he emerged and began to help the wounded diners. Richard Hawkins, also fell to the floor after hearing shots, and though he drew his revolver, he stated other people were in his line of fire and he was unable to shoot the gunman. Neither officer was able to identify the gunmen beyond describing them as young Orientals. Subsection 4. Cleaning up. Chester Yu drove the shooters back to the house in Pacifica after the shooting, and the weapons were returned to the closet. After the return, the Joe boys stayed awake until dawn, discussing the shooting. They then slept for a few hours before awakening to listen to news of the killing. They dispatched Tony Chunho Setso, another Joe boy, to pick up noodles from the Golden Dragon for breakfast. Later that morning, the perpetrators retrieved the weapons from the closet, cutting them into pieces in the garage, and asked Setso to dump the pieces in San Francisco Bay. Setso drove Chester Yu to a location within sight of Kijun's, a Burlingame restaurant where Setso worked, and together they dumped the parts into the bay near San Francisco International Airport. A week after the shooting, Tom Yu called Carlos Yan for the last time, asking Yan to, quote, keep cool, unquote. Section 2. Victims. The 5 victims fatally shot at the restaurant were later identified as Calvin M. Fong, 18, a graduate of Archbishop Redorian High School. Donald Kwan, 20, a graduate of Abraham Lincoln High School. Denise Louis, 21, an urban planning student at the University of Washington. Paul Wada, 25, a law student at the University of San Francisco. Fong Wong, 48, an immigrant from Hong Kong working as a server at the Golden Dragon. Section 3. Aftermath. 1 week after the shooting, 2 Joe boys were shot by suspected Hua-Ching gunmen, leaving one dead and the other critically wounded in what police called a revenge-motivated shooting. Michael Lee, 18, was killed, and Lo, quote, Mark, unquote, Chan, 19, was wounded critically during the ambush at the entryway of Chan's Richmond District home. Chinatown, one of the leading tourist destinations in San Francisco, suffered after the shooting. Nighttime dining in Chinatown was depressed as restaurant reservations were canceled en masse following the shooting. Although the Golden Dragon reopened just 7 hours after shooting, it closed as early as 10 p.m. in the weeks following a drop in patronage. Normally, it would stay open until 3 a.m. Business and tourist traffic remained depressed for several weeks following the shootings, although other businesses stated that the rising cost of labor in Chinatown was to blame for increased prices and decreased patronage. By December, business at the Golden Dragon remained down and police had still not made any arrests, although by that time Michael Louis, the reported target that night, had been arrested for suspected involvement in the 1976 murder of Kit Mun Louis, no relation, an 18-year-old immigrant from Hong Kong. Subsection 1. Investigation. The San Francisco Police Department, SFPD, announced they were close to solving the crime soon after the shooting, but Chief Charles Gain criticized the Chinatown community for its silence and, quote, abdication of responsibility, unquote, due to, quote, the subculture of fear, unquote, of gang reprisals. SFPD Lieutenant Daniel Murphy, head of the investigation, said, quote, because so many innocent people were killed and injured, this time we have been getting more cooperation out of the residents and witnesses in Chinatown than we normally do, unquote. Chinatown residents came forward to provide tips in the days following the shooting, identifying that Hua-Ching diners and Joe boy assailants were present that night. Chief Gain followed up his earlier criticism by calling gambling in Chinatown, quote, blatant, historic, and rampant, unquote. Gain later claimed his criticism of gambling in Chinatown was a gambit to anger the community and provoke them into providing more information. Gordon Liu, an editor of the local Chinatown newspaper, East West, in turn criticized the SFPD for relying on information and cooperation from community leaders linked to the underworld, leading to community distrust of the SFPD, and concluding that, quote, committing suicide is not a virtue among the Chinese, unquote. John Fong, founder of the Joe Boys, said in an interview from prison that SFPD officers had been paid to protect gambling operations in Chinatown, which Chief Gang disputed, saying that was part of the police culture prior to his ascension to chief. Mayor George Moscone announced a $25,000 equivalent to $1,500 in 2019, a reward for information leading to the conviction of the shooters 2 days after it occurred, the largest reward offered in San Francisco to date. The unprecedented reward was eventually increased to $100,000, equivalent to $422,000 in 2019, in late September, the highest reward allowed by city law. The SFPD received the first lead in the case 2 weeks after the shooting, pointing at Curtis Tam. However, by December 1977, no arrests had yet been made, though police were investigating the deadly rivalry between the Doughboys and Hua Qing. The reward was eventually collected by Gan Hua, Robert, Wu of the Doughboys. Wu had been arrested in March 1978 for participating in another gang skirmish on February 15th in Portsmouth Square, a shooting that left 2 Hua Qing members wounded. He gave the police a recording of Tam conversing about the massacre. Subsequently, Wu was kept in protective custody after he had been identified as the informant. Subsection 2. Arrests. Curtis Tam, Melvin Yu, Peter Ning, Chester Yu, and Tom Yu were eventually arrested and convicted. After their arrests, the gunmen were identified as Ning, Melvin Yu, and Tam, all 17 years old at the time of the shooting. Curtis Tam was the first to be arrested on March 24, 1978. Tam, an immigrant from Hong Kong, was 18 years old and attending Galileo High School at the time of his arrest. A police informant recorded Tam recounting the details of the attack, and shortly after his arrest, anonymous sources identified Tam as one of the gunmen. During his initial interrogation, Tam confessed and implicated 11 others. A hearing was held in April 1978 to determine if Tam should be tried as an adult, which was granted. The recording of Tam's interrogation was first played at an arraignment hearing in May 1978, and again at his trial. In it, he claimed, "They made me do it. If I didn't shoot anybody, then they'd say, I'm chicken. I don't think I shot anybody because I didn't aim at anybody." Unquote. In early April 1978, the Yu brothers, Tom, Chester, and Dana, hired an attorney, George Walker, to make a plea bargain. In turn, their attorney met with the assigned assistant district attorney, Hugh Levine, on April 3rd and explained his 3 unnamed clients were requesting immunity for 2 brothers, Tom and Dana Yu, in exchange for their testimony against the shooters. Walker described those 2 brothers as peripherally involved, specifically calling Tom Yu, a peripheral figure who had inadvertently answered a telephone call at a house in Pacifica, which had informed him that members of the Hua Qing and Hop Sing were at the Golden Dragon. The 3rd brother, Chester, admitted his role as a getaway driver, but requested for his proceedings to be held in juvenile court in exchange for his testimony. Levine tentatively agreed to allow the driver to enter juvenile court and provided immunity to the 2 brothers, conditioned upon confirmation that 1. They were peripherally involved in the crime, and 2. Their testimonies were truthful. Levine met Walker's 3 clients for the first time on April 19th. Dana Yu's request for immunity was granted, and Chester Yu was allowed to enter the juvenile court system. However, since Levine already knew that Tom Yu, as a leader in the Doughboys, could not have been involved only peripherally, immunity for Tom Yu was rejected. The weapons used in the attack were recovered by police divers from San Francisco Bay on April 20th, 1978, after Chester Yu showed them where they had been dumped. After Chester mentioned that a, Carlos, had called the house in Pacifica, Carlos Yon became a witness for the prosecution. At a preliminary hearing in May 1978, Tony Zetso described, bungled efforts to dump a bag full of guns, Ballistic tests matched the recovered weapons with bullets taken from those killed. On April 21st, the SFPD announced the arrests of Peter Ning and an unnamed juvenile, later identified as the driver of the getaway car, Chester Yu, and named Melvin Yu as another suspect they were seeking in connection with the massacre. Melvin Yu and Peter Chung arrested early on the morning of April 23rd, 18 miles, or 29 kilometers, east of Carson City, Nevada. Tom Yu dropped George Walker as his attorney and surrendered to the police after the Memorial Day weekend. In all, 9 were arrested and scheduled to be tried for their roles in the massacre: Curtis Tam, Peter Ning, Tom Yu, Melvin Yu, Cam Lee, Chester Yu, Tony Setso, Peter Chung, and Donald Wong. Section 3. Trials. By August 1978, 3 youths who were charged with being accessories to the crimes had been found guilty or pleaded guilty in closed juvenile court proceedings. Curtis Tam. Tam was scheduled to go on trial on July 31st, 1978, but the trial was delayed while a change of venue was being contemplated. Tam's trial began on August 21st, and he was convicted on 5 murder counts and 11 assault counts on September 5th, 1978. Attorneys from the defendant made several motions to move the trial venue, sequester the jury, and ban reporters from the courtroom, none of which were granted. During his trial, Tam testified he had deliberately aimed his shotgun away from the diners and only participated in the shooting under duress. However, Chester Yu testified that Tam was, quote, very happy, unquote, after the shooting, and recalled hearing Tam say he, quote, wanted to shoot more people, unquote. And Tam was recorded by Robert Wu, threatening the life of a suspected police informant. 13 eyewitnesses were called to testify at Tam's trial, including 8 of the 11 wounded. None identified Curtis Tam as one of the gunmen, although the witnesses who initially spotted the trio running towards the restaurant identified Peter Ning from a police photograph. The prosecutors rested their case against Tam on August 29th after playing a recording of his confession, taken after his arrest on March 24th. Attorneys made closing arguments on September 1st, and after the Labor Day weekend, the jury reconvened on September 5th. After deliberating for just over a day, the jury found Tam guilty of 5 accounts of second-degree murder, 11 accounts of assault, and 7 weapons possession charges. Tam faced a sentence of up to 35 years imprisonment, but a defense attorney vowed to appeal the verdict, which he called, quote, a compromise, unquote, because he thought, quote, the jury considered duress in reducing their finding of intent on Tam's part, unquote. The sentencing hearing was set for October 3rd. Tam received a sentence of 28 years imprisonment. On June 18, 1981, the California Court of Appeals reduced his sentence to 23 years. Tam filed another appeal on August 1981. Melvin Yu. After Tam's trial, Tom Yu, Melvin Yu, and Peter Ning stood trial. On September 26, 1978, Melvin Yu was convicted after 4 hours of deliberation of 5 accounts of first-degree murder and 11 accounts of assault with a deadly weapon. His attorney offered no defense against the charges, and Melvin Yu did not testify at his trial. He received a life sentence. Melvin Yu was released from Salona State Prison in 2015. Peter Ning. Peter Ning went on trial on January 8, 1979 in Fresno, and was convicted on February 22nd of 5 accounts of first-degree murder and 11 accounts of assault with a deadly weapon. Jurors deliberated 4 hours before reaching this verdict. Tom Yu. Tom Yu was indicted but moved to dismiss the charges on the basis that he had been granted immunity by Levine. The trial court denied the motion, finding both that he had not satisfied the 2 imposed conditions, and further that his proposed testimony was not true. Yu then entered a conditional guilty plea in 1979 on 1 count of conspiracy to commit second-degree murder and admitted that a firearm was used in the crime. The plea bargain was then extended to Tom Yu on April 25, 1978, modified on May 30th, and accepted by Yu on September 1st. However, upon reviewing the probation report, which called Tom Yu, quote, the prime mover in the whole thing, unquote, the court rejected the plea bargain and restored the original charges. Yu appealed the rejection of the plea bargain since the court had previously ruled it was a binding agreement, although the presiding judge also added the condition that court judgment could be used to set it aside. The trial venue had been moved first to Fresno due to publicity in San Francisco, but then Santa Barbara since Peter Ning had already been tried and convicted in Fresno. Yu's first trial ended in a hung jury on September 1979. He was later convicted of 5 accounts of first-degree murder, 11 accounts of assault by means of force likely to produce great bodily injury, 1 account of conspiracy to commit murder, and 1 account of conspiracy to commit assault with a deadly weapon. He was sentenced to life imprisonment in state prison. Subsection 4. Release and Parole. In October 1991, Curtis Tam was released from prison. Tam requested a certificate of rehabilitation and pardon in September 2018. The request was denied in November. In 2014, Melvin Yu was granted parole. During the parole hearing, he said that he had plans to live with a cousin in Hong Kong and expected to be deported back there. As of 2017, a spokesman for the Chinese consulate of San Francisco stated that there was no record of deporting requests from Yu, and Yu had been living in San Francisco. Yu converted to Christianity approximately 10 years after the shooting at the Golden Dragon and served time at the Duell Vocational Institute, where he took college courses in mathematics. Tom Yu was eligible for parole in 2017 and was released before September 2018. Peter Ning was eligible for parole in 2020 after being denied 8 times, most recently in 2015. According to state records, he was no longer listed as an inmate in 2018. Subsection 5. Long-term results. An ex-Joe Boys member, Bill Lee, wrote about the killings and his gang experiences in Chinese Playground, a memoir. Lee left the gang shortly after the 1977 massacre. He filed a police report over an April 1999 incident in which former peers said he should not have written the book during a public reading. The Golden Dragon Massacre led to the establishment of the SFPD's Chinatown, later Asian, Gang Task Force, credited with ending gang-related violence in Chinatown by 1983. The task force's first credited arrest was Michael Louis, the reputed 21-year-old leader of the Huaqing, who was one of the targets of the Golden Dragon Massacre. Michael Louis was arrested on December 5, 1977, for the murder of Kit Mun Louis, no relation. Kit Mun was an 18-year-old immigrant from Hong Kong via Honolulu who was shot and killed on August 29, 1976. The two had been romantically involved, but he confessed to being angry with her for, quote, whoring around with Joe Boys, unquote. He claimed that to frighten her, he put an unloaded gun to her head as she was sleeping and pulled the trigger. Although he had removed the clip to unload it, the firing chamber was still loaded with a live round, and he shot her at point-blank range. Afterward, he scattered pieces of the weapon in San Francisco Bay and dumped her body near Stinson Beach, where it was discovered on January 1, 1977, but was not identified until November 1977. Michael Louis pled guilty to voluntary manslaughter and possession of a deadly weapon after his arrest, receiving a sentence of 15 years imprisonment in January 1978. He was eligible for parole after 4 years. Robert Wu, the informant who collected the $100,000 reward, was killed during a shootout with police while robbing a jewelry shop in Los Angeles on December 19, 1984. The Golden Dragon restaurant continued operations shortly after the massacre, but patronage was down and it failed a health inspection in September 1978. After failing another health inspection in January 2006, it was closed. The restaurant also owed a year's worth of paychecks to its employees. It reopened in May 2006 as the Imperial Palace Restaurant. Section 4. See also. The following section is a list of articles which pertain and are relevant to this article. 1. 101 California Street Shooting, a 1993 massacre that took place a short distance away in San Francisco's financial district. 2. Boston Chinatown Massacre, a 1991 gang-related mass murder in Boston. 3. History of Chinese Americans in San Francisco. 4. List of massacres in the United States. 5. Wah-Mee Massacre, a 1983 mass shooting in Seattle. Section 5. References. There are references available in the written form of this article. Please be sure to verify information found on Wikipedia using the references provided or by cross-referencing the information yourself. Section 6. External links. In addition to the above, several external links have been provided to find more information online. Number 1. Ramez Raw, January 1st, 1979. Turning to the Bible in Prison, San Francisco Examiner. Retrieved April 5th, 2020. 2. Morris Brockman, 2000. Bamboo Tigers of San Francisco's Chinatown Golden Dragon Massacre, 1977. Retrieved July 17th, 2017. 3. Notes Underworld, Asian Week. 4. 1999, Bill Lee's Chinese Playground at the San Francisco Public Library on YouTube, reading from the book and answering questions, recorded September 28th, 1999. This has been Golden Dragon Massacre from Wikipedia, the free encyclopedia at en.wikipedia.org. Read to you by Whatgum. This sound file and all text in the article are licensed under the Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike 3.0 Unported license, available at creativecommons.org/licenses/by-sa/3.0.